get started. Welcome everybody to today's virtual PhD in a cup of tea. I'm really pleased to welcome Maria Visconti today, who will present her work on the discursive strategies of Nazi defendants during the Nuremberg trials. So if you haven't attended one of these before, this is our series that is meant to be an informal environment where PhD students and early career researchers can present their research in progress for feedback from other postgraduates, faculty, and of course, anyone who's interested in learning more about the topic. So if you are interested in presenting your research, please be in touch with me after the event over email. I'll drop my email and a link to the series in the chat at some point. We have several others coming up for this year. We're actually, I think, pretty full up for this year. So we're already starting to book sessions for next year. So please feel free to be in touch. So Maria will have a presentation for about 30 minutes, and after that we'll have time for discussion. If you would like to just raise your hand, you can use the button at the bottom of the screen. I feel like probably everybody knows the kind of Zoom etiquette now. Please just push the button at the bottom and then I will come to you to unmute you. You can also type your comments in the chat at any time, but you'll be kept on mute throughout just to keep the noise level and any unexpected disturbance to a minimum. So to introduce Maria Visconti is a PhD candidate at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, UFMG in Brazil, and one of the coordinators of the Brazilian Center for Nazism and Holocaust Studies, or NEPAT. She is a member of the Perpetrator Studies Network, and her dissertation, 1,000 Years Will Pass and Still This Guilt of Germany Will Not Have Been Erased, Nazis' Narrative Constructions During the Nuremberg Trial, 1945 to 46, develops a set of archetypes of ways the Nazis behave and evade responsibility during the post-war trials. Thus, these archetypes and this research can serve as a basis to better understand similar perpetrator narratives in other trials. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the virtual floor over to Maria. Maria, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christine. I'm going to just share my screen here. 1 moment. Okay. Okay. So everyone can hear me, right? Yes. Okay, so I want firstly to thank the Wiener Holocaust Library and of course Christine for the opportunity to speak here at this PhD in a Cup of Tea series, which is a fantastic opportunity for me. As I was telling Christine, I don't have any dialogue or whatsoever about my research field here in my country. So also thank you so much for my colleagues who are here today to talk to me and to hear me. I'm very grateful. So as Christina said, my name is Maria, and I am the final year of my PhD at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil, where I also did my graduation and my master's degree. I also did a graduation extent in Germany at the Friedrich Alexander University in Erlangen, Nuremberg in 2013. I am also the senior founder and coordinator of NEPAT, the Brazilian Center for Nazism and Holocaust Studies, which is a female-led initiative that has been active since 2019. My co-workers are here watching today, Ana, Viana, and Barbara Deotti. NEPAT works as a scientific divulgation, like on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, also YouTube, and we also have a podcast, and we also work on the academic fields where we organize academic events and we lead an international studies network. Anna and Barbara will leave here on the comments the links, the websites, our contact information, so you get to know us better. So my path as a researcher, I started researching Nazism in 2011 during my graduation, and I started my master's in 2015, having earned my degree in 2017, where I researched the White Rose Resistance Group. During my research about the resistance, I began to be particularly interested in questions about guilt and responsibility, so I decided to make a rather dramatic thematic shift for my PhD, and I started researching the Nazis in the Nuremberg Trial. So my PhD began in 2018, and I guess, as is the case with most researchers, I was not quite sure how I would approach the questions that were troubling me. So what started with a dissertation about the multiple forms of the Nazis' discourses during the trial transformed into a dissertation about ways of behaving and presenting oneself in court. So it was only actually months ago that the work actually began to take shape. I struggle that I imagine some of my colleagues here can relate, because I should be writing, but I'm still thinking about it. Therefore, now my main focus, as I start to actually write the dissertation, is to create a set of models, archetypes, of ways to avoid responsibility in post-war trials. So as Christine said, I hope that those archetypes can help us better understand similar narratives in other trials. So what I am to present here today is a broader spectrum of their research and how I plan to develop it. I hope I can have some insights from my colleagues here. I'm open to suggestions, to critiques. I'm sure you'll help me a lot. Like I said, it has been a really lonely road for me during this year, so I'm really grateful to be here. I divided this presentation in 3 parts. I will firstly present the cases, the Nazis who were trialed, the sentences, and I will briefly talk about the courts in Nuremberg. Then I will present narratives for some of the archetypes that I am sure will be used in the dissertation, because I am still unsure how we will organize all the models, but I hope this can give us a broader idea of the research. And in the end, I will present some of my thoughts and considerations about the cases and how I intend to integrate what I have seen in the sources with the theory that we have so far. So let's begin. Just a moment. Okay. Oops, I'm sorry. The Nuremberg Trial, also known as the International Military Tribunal, occurred between 1945 and 1946 in Nuremberg, Germany. It was the first trial of the Nazis during the process of the denazification of Europe. It served as the basis for all the subsequent Nazi trials, including the most recent ones. This first trial judged 22 Nazis, including Martin Bormann, who were tried in absentia, and the defendants were not only prominent and famous Nazi leaders, such as Hermann Göring, who is in this picture, but also minor members of the Third Reich's gears, such as Hans Fritzsche or Franz von Papen. On the indictment, the defendants were judged based on 4 main accusations, which were common plan or conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The first accusation of conspiracy was held by the United States and brought much controversy during the proceedings, as it assumed the Nazis knew since the 1933 that the extermination of the Jews would take place a decade later. We do have another quarrel concerning the brand new concept of crime against humanity, and with, of course, the understanding that the Second World War's crimes crossed a moral line that the First World War has not crossed. As the historian Kim Priemel puts it, the Nuremberg trial fundamentally decided if Germany was so far gone or if it still deserved a seat at the enlightened West table. So my primary sources in this dissertation are the trial transcripts, which are cataloged in what is called Blue Series and are available for download in the Library of Congress. Those are the complete transcripts of the Nuremberg trial with 42 volumes, although the actual transcripts are only within the 22 first volumes. It's like maybe 700, 800 pages each volume. So as you can see, it's a lot of work. Considering that if we accept Martin Bormann, we have 21 Nazis being trialed in Nuremberg. And for that, I had to narrow down my study to the cases that do have a narrative in those Blue Series documents. So with that in mind, I excluded Rudolf Hess and William Frick as they do not present testimony, so I cannot therefore analyze their discourse. That leaves me with 19 cases to organize into these archetypes, into these categories, so that I will present here. And of those 19 cases, 10 were sentenced to death, 3 were declared innocent, and 6 were sentenced to prison, even though only 3 served the entire sentence. As a secondary source, I also used the interviews given by the Nazis for the psychiatrist Leon Goldenson and the psychologist Gustav Gilbert, that were published in edited books called the Nuremberg Interviews and the Nuremberg Diaries. So that's the 3 of my main sources here. Those are not my main focus, but they do help me better understand the persona they are trying to build, or actually the multiple personas, as is the case of some of the Nazis. For instance, Hans Frank, the Butcher of Poland, presents himself very differently when speaking to different people and in different contexts. So those are my cases, and I will present here today Ernest Kaltenbrunner, Julius Streicher, and Jaume Schacht. But in the dissertation, I will hopefully talk about all of them. So far, I can present here 3 archetypes that I was able to track when analyzing the discourses of the man on the doc. And I will demonstrate here how these archetypes work by bringing one example of each one. The first one that I chose to call true believers are the Nazis who remain Nazis, even when facing death. Here we have men who are not afraid to show their ongoing alignment with the Nazi belief system and take the time to defend the regime and its leader, Adolf Hitler. Hermann Göring is an excellent example of this model with his United Front policy, but I will present here today Julius Streicher's case because I believe it's more interesting. The second archetype, as I call it, are the oblivious deniers. By this, I mean the ones who deny their participation in any activity that could be seen as criminal and claim complete ignorance about everything concerning their own jobs. For this model, the case of Ernest Kaltenbrunner is very representative, as he denies even seeing documents that bear his own signature. And the last set of examples I will present here today are the ones that I chose to call disappointed resistants. Those are men who either claim to have resisted Nazism from the beginning, even when having an office or a ministry position, or men who present themselves as very disappointed with the Third Reich. Jaume Schacht is an excellent example of these archetypes because he presents himself as the most anti-Nazi Nazi we have ever seen in our lives. As I said before, as I keep on reading these narratives, I intend to set at least 2 other models, or even maybe change the classification, because it could be the case that one archetype is split in 2, but either way, I chose to present here today is the one that I am pretty sure it will appear on the dissertation. So we'll begin with Julius Streicher's case. Julius Streicher was the founder of the anti-Semitic newspaper, Der Stimme, whose circulation began in 1923 and remained active until the end of the war in 1945. It was mainly for his publications that he was accused in Nuremberg for conspiracy and crimes against humanity. While the Völkische Beobachter, the Nazi party newspaper edited by Alfred Rosenberg, who was also tried in Nuremberg, intended to be a serious newspaper with at least some information for the population, despite also being anti-Semitic, Der Stimme was a tabloid. It only served to foment anti-Semitic propaganda using caricatures and demeaning images of the Jews. Streicher was found guilty of crimes against humanity and was executed on October 16, 1946. He represents the category that I have called true believers, as he does not deny what he has written and does not deny that he still thinks that way until that day. After all, everything he wrote and his anti-Semitic views were merely things that have been proven to be the truth. In his own words, I might mention here that I deliberately gave my fighting paper, Der Stimme, the subtitle, A Week for the Fight for the Truth. I was quite conscious that I could not be in possession of the entire truth, but I also know that 80 or 90% of what I proclaimed with conviction was the truth. So those were facts, no questions about them. In that way, Streicher claims that fate took him to that point in his life, and he had no regrets. He was still proud of his worldview. His new paper, Der Stimme, contained the truth. Therefore, he was an upholder of that truth, a truth that has been supported by centuries of anti-Semitic literature and, no surprise here, by the Jews themselves. He has therefore no problems whatsoever in saying he was still anti-Semitic. With an what is outstanding in his narrative is the way he talks about his work as an enlightenment activity, in his own words. He wanted to provide information for the German people and clarify the Jewish question. As he says, he did not preach religious hatred because Jews were not a religious group at all, but a race. His mission was to enlighten people about the Jewish problem, and historical facts had proved this problem throughout the years. As he says to psychologist Gustav Gilbert, the Jews are making a mistake if they make a martyr out of me. You will see, I didn't create the problem. It existed for hundreds of years. In that way, Streicher did not see his publications to put people on edge and facilitate the extermination process. He spoke the facts, and this enlightenment activity had nothing to do with inciting people to commit and to perpetrate mass murder, which was the main accusation against him in Nuremberg. He says, the speeches and articles which I wrote were meant to inform the public on a question which appeared to me one of the most important questions. I did not intend to agitate or inflammate, but to enlighten. So we have here another example that I chose to present here today. Oh, I'm sorry. So you may call them a race or a nation, whichever you like now, but you were saying that they were a nation of bloodsuckers and extortioners. Do you call that preaching hatred? That is a statement, the expression of a conviction which can be proved on the basis of historical facts. So I did not ask whether there is a fact or not. I'm asking whether you're preaching hatred. The answer is yes or no. No, it is not preaching hatred. It's just a statement of facts. So he's presented a document that he said, as long as I stand at the head of the struggle, this struggle will be conducted so honestly that the eternal Jew will derive no joy from it. That I wrote, that was right. And you were you not, one of those who did stand and continue to stand at the head of that struggle? That part is actually funny. Did I stand at the head? I am too modest of a man for that. But I do claim to have declared my conviction and my knowledge clearly and unmistakably. So why did you say that so long as you were at the head of it, the Jew would derive no joy from it? Because I consider myself a man whom destiny had placed in a position to enlighten people on the Jewish question. So as Eichmann would do years later, Streicher appeals that he wrote propaganda but did not make the discriminatory laws, was not consulted about those laws, and did not act upon those laws. So if he did not write those laws himself, he does not hold their responsibility. He says, that has nothing to do with what I wrote. I did not issue the orders. I did not make the laws. I was not asked when the laws were prepared. I had nothing to do with these laws and orders. In that sense, he had a clear conscience, as he says to psychiatrist Leon Goldenson, quoting, if everyone had as clear a conscience as I have, nobody in the world would have to take sleeping pills or visit doctors. My conscience is as clear as a baby's. Nonetheless, even to that day, he still did not believe that the Nazi regime committed mass murder. He says, I do not know, and again, I would not have believed it. To this day, I do not believe that 5 million were killed. I consider it technically impossible that that could have happened. I do not believe it. I have not received proof of that until now. Be that as it may, as he is not shy to say, he was still a member of the Nazi movement and therefore still believed in that ideology. He denies having acted more directly toward the extermination process, but he does not deny the belief behind it. Streicher is an outspoken anti-Semite, and even facing death, he does not try to change it or sugarcoat it, a true believer in a very particular way. So now we'll move on to Kaltenbrunner's case. Okay. Ernest Kaltenbrunner was a police officer and head of the Reichssicherheitsamt, the Reich main security office, a vast organization that controlled not only the police, but the Gestapo and the security and administrative branches from 1939 and 1945. Kaltenbrunner was the successor of the famous Heinrich Heydrich and the man with the highest SS rank in the dock. He was tried at Nuremberg for conspiracy, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Found guilty of the last 2 counts, he was sentenced to death and hanged on October 16, 1946. Kaltenbrunner's case is remarkable as he is the first defendant who denies absolutely everything, which is why I called his category oblivious deniers. In a very particular way, as a lawyer, Kaltenbrunner uses the prosecution process to his advantage. He takes the documents, the dates, and timelines, calls in witness in order to prove that he could not have personally done such a thing. After all, he was not even present during that meeting because he had not even assumed his post yet. And the stamp on the document proved he did not know about such a document, and so on. When presented to him, most of his signatures are identified by him as a facsimile or an ink signature, which would mean that one of his employees forged his signature without his knowledge. When presented with documents and statements, either from witness or documents from himself, he claims that evidence can be refuted. At one point, losing his temper, he says, if you bring false accusations against me, I must declare them to be false. I cannot say yes to everything of which you accuse me just because the prosecution is wrong in determining who is Himmler's representative here. So as stated, he does not see himself as Himmler's representative, and accordingly, he does not see himself as the SS representative either. His attitude is unique in the trial. Until then, the other defendants admitted at least something regarding their role. Even when they did not admit it, they tried to explain their reasons, talked about the wartime conditions, claimed to be deceived, and or explained that they were only obeying orders. Kaltenbrunner's case is entirely different. He does not defend himself by saying that he was under Himmler orders. Instead, he defends himself by denying the veracity of all the documents and all the testimony that are presented to him, as if the orders did not exist at all. He did not know anything, did not do anything, did not know anybody, and did not sign anything whatsoever. As he says, I did not write this letter, that it may have been submitted to me for my signature among thousands of papers which I might have had to look into the possibility in the course of one day, I cannot, of course, deny. From this, however, you cannot draw the conclusion that I undoubtedly knew about the matter. You cannot imagine the extent of the official functions which I took over in complete ignorance of police background without instructions for carrying out police functions. Kaltenbrunner's denials challenged the logical sense and made everyone in the courtroom lose their temper, including his fellow Nazis on the dock. As can be imagined, he completely distanced himself from the National Socialist ideology, from Hitler, and even from the SS, the organization he was part of. As Heinrich's successor, he was one of the prosecution's most prominent cases in Nuremberg, and he's quite aware of that. Nevertheless, in his defense, Kaltenbrunner does not deny that crimes were committed under the Third Reich. However, he completely denies his involvement in those crimes. He did not carry out Heinrich's crimes, as he says, quoting him, I am stating here emphatically that the special assignments which had been given to Heinrich, such as, for instance, the assignment with regard to the final solution of the Jewish problem, were not only not known to me at that time, but were not taken over by me. So another example of his denial is this one here. Did you have any personal knowledge or anything personal to do with any of the atrocities which occurred in concentration camps during the war? No. And therefore you assume no responsibility before this tribunal for any such atrocities? No, I do not assume any responsibility in that regard. And therefore you assume no responsibility for anything done in connection with the program for extermination of the Jews? Yes. And does the same thing apply to the program of forced labor? Yes. Does the same thing apply to the raising of the Warsaw Ghetto? Yes. To the execution of the 50 flyers in connection to Stalag Luft? Yes. To the various orders with respect to the killing of the enemy flyers? Yes. And did you make all the same denials in the course of interrogations before this trial? Yes. And you still make them there today? Yes. So as part of the idea that he does not deny the crimes, he claims to have done all he could within his enormous limitations to avoid the regime's horror spreading. As soon as he found out about the crimes, Kaltenbrunner protested to Himmler and, similar to other cases, claimed he could not leave his post and remain active so he could do whatever he could to help the victims. However, unlike Göring, Keitel, Ribbentrop, and even Streicher, who still somehow try to defend at least some part of the Nazi government, Kaltenbrunner presents himself as a kind of a dumb Nazi employee, one who could do no harm as he was not even there. He could not have been there. His employee forged his signature. He did not know. He had never heard of such a thing, and so on. So the last case that I'm going to present is Jaume Schacht, which was the president of the Reichsbank until 1939 and Reich Minister of Economy until 1943. He was tried at Nuremberg for conspiracy and crimes against peace and was declared innocent of both counts. Schacht was released in 1946 and died in 1970 at 93 years old. He also wrote an autobiography entitled Confessions of the Old Wizard, published in 1955. So this case is also interesting because unlike Streicher and Kaltenbrunner, he was declared innocent in Nuremberg. As a representative of the category disappointed resistance, Schacht presents himself as a strong anti-Nazi. In an unprecedented way in Nuremberg, Schacht denies any relationship with the Nazi ideology, with other Nazis, and with Führer. As he says to Leon Goldenson, these other criminals belong in the dock, but not me. After all, he was a democratic man who fell into the National Socialist movement as an alternative for the internal crisis that Germany was suffering under Weimar. Initially, no doubt at all, Hitler did not have evil desires, in his own words, and was aiming for the good of the German people. The Führer, however, promised too much and delivered too little. As a result, Adolf Hitler betrayed him and the German people. As he points out to Gilbert, what Hitler did to us was a crime against all culture. On the other hand, he was not so fond of Hitler to begin with. He says, I have never felt disappointed by Hitler because I had not expected more of him than my appraisal of his personality allowed me. But I certainly consider myself deceived, swindled, and cheated by him to the highest degree, because whatever he had previously promised to the German people, and thereby to me, he did not keep afterwards. He did everything to break his promises. He lied to and deceived the world, Germany, and me. But let there be no mistake, Schacht was never an adherent of Hitler's plans. He explained here. Excuse me, I think there is a basic error here. It appears from this as if I had been a convincing adherent of Hitler at some time. I was never that. Therefore, there was no question of a break with Hitler. A break could only be spoken of had I been closely connected with him before. At heart, I was never closely connected with Hitler, but to all appearances, I worked in the cabinet. For the old wizard, as he calls himself, the Third Reich was a regime of terror, in many ways totalitarian, violent, that punished any form of freedom of expression. To explain his role in this criminal regime, he says he works for the German people, not for Nazism. However, the Third Reich was so dictatorial that the only way to offer resistance was from within the regime. Thus, he continued to work as a minister to offer resistance, a moderate influence within the regime, calling himself a minister without portfolio, which would mean that he had no power whatsoever. Schacht was, after all, inside the regime, but not a part of it. As he puts it, well, I never considered myself a part of the regime exactly, because I was against it. He calls himself no man. So we have here quote. You remember that Goering exclaims, I should like to know where the no men are. I want to ask you now, do you claim this honorary title of no man for yourself? On every occasion, when I was no longer in a position to do what my inner conviction demanded, I said no. I was not content to be silent in the face of the many misdeeds committed by the party. In every case, I expressed my disapproval of these things, personally, officially, and publicly. I said no to all those things. I blocked credits. I opposed an excessive rearmament. I talked against the war, and I took steps to prevent the war. I did not know to whom else this honorary title of no man might apply if not to me. Did you not swear an oath of allegiance to Hitler? I did not swear an oath of allegiance to a certain Herr Hitler. I swore allegiance to Adolf Hitler as the head of the state of the German people, just as I did not swear allegiance to the Kaiser or the President Ebert or to President Hindenburg, except in their capacity as head of the state. In the same way, I did not swear an oath to Adolf Hitler. The oath of allegiance which I did swear to the head of the German state does not apply to the person of the head of that state. It applies to what he represents, the German nation. Perhaps I might add something in this connection. I would never keep an oath of allegiance to a perjurer, and Hitler has turned out to be a 100-fold perjurer. Hence, no one had been more against the Nazi regime than he had. No one had tried to prevent the evils of the Nazi regime more than he had. Schacht was the anti-Nazi Nazi par excellence. However, we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. Not all the Nazi principles were that bad. Some of the movement principles were correct, such as the need for the German living space and the resistance towards the Versailles Treaty. As a proud German man and a nationalist, he stood by those initial principles. And as it was the case with so many academics, Schacht claimed to be a Nazi who wanted the initial and original form of Nazism. He wanted to put brakes on Hitler's policy, not to end it entirely. In his own words, I did not say that I wanted to defeat his program. I said that I wanted to direct it into orderly channels. Convinced of his innocence, the trial appeared to him as an opportunity to build a better future for everyone. He says to Goldenson, I have never believed in war. It is a crime against humanity whether you win or lose. I just read an article in this magazine I have in my hands that one day the moon will fall on Earth. But it is my feeling that until then, we should try to make the world a better place to live in. So who is better to build a better world than an innocent anti-Nazi Nazi? So to end this presentation, I would like to point out that taking a closer look into this narrative does not mean trying to pursue some truth into what these men are saying. when analyzing discourses made in an international military tribunal, is beyond evidence that the defendants are trying to avoid primarily the death penalty. Therefore, it is expected that they would deny their involvement and their responsibility in the crimes committed by the National Socialist regime. And it's also foreseen that they would try to blame the other Nazis who were not there, especially the ones of the high command, such as Himmler, Goebbels, and even Hitler himself. That being said, one cannot be naive when looking into these speeches. Nonetheless, it is possible to recognize narrative patterns and strategies that repeat themselves throughout this trial and come from different men from different government positions facing different accusations and who also had different outcomes, which is the case here for Schacht is innocent and the other two are declared guilty. Finding those patterns and transforming them into archetypes can help us better understand other Nazi discourses in other post-war trials, including the most recent ones. However, even considering a dose of expected denial, there are some groups whose discourses stand out. When looking into these documents, it became clear to me that not all of those men were Adolf Eichmann, and therefore, not all of those men fit into the banality of evil category. Actually, not even most of them in Nuremberg can be understood as men who do not think, using Hannah Arendt's words. But when putting this concept together, among others, such as working towards the Führer from Ian Cashel, fragmentation from Zvetan Todorov, or even Gita Sereni's conclusions from her interviews with Albert Speer and Franz Stengel, I was able to see that not all Nazis behave the same way when fighting for their lives. Those who deny do not deny in the same way. And those who do not deny and claim to regret their actions do not do it in identical ways either. The archetypes true believers with men such as Julius Streicher and Hermann Göring still makes me unsettled. After all, why defend a regime with a rope around your neck? Those are the moments when we can see that until this day, Nuremberg is still up for debates, and that is true, as Eric Hobsbawm puts it, that it is easier to judge the 20th century than it is to understand it. So I leave here some of my literature and also my contact information, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. That was excellent and really, really fascinating preview of your research, and it's obviously very, very rich, and you've managed to distill it into the 3 examples which were presented really clearly and helpfully, so thank you for that. I'm going to ask anyone who wants to ask a question or make a comment to either use the reaction button at the bottom to raise your hand or post it in the chat. But actually, I had a first question, maybe if I can abuse the role of chair and ask you, and actually it pertains to the second to the last slide that you showed, and also kind of how you began when you talked about the vast amount of course, primary sources that you're accessing and trying to process and analyze to be able to develop these archetypes. And then as you closed with some of the historiography. So I was just going to ask, and you mentioned Todorov and Gita Sereni and Hannah Arendt, but how would you position your work in the historiography, and which scholars have been the most influential, which do you agree with, which do you position your work against? And also, do you find that you're looking, using sort of methodologies from kind of legal theory and rhetoric as well? I mean, it just occurs to me that's quite a potentially interdisciplinary sort of study that you're doing. So thought maybe we could start there, and then hopefully people will put their questions in as they come to them.
So do I answer now?
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, actually, my main point was that I did not find that all of the concepts that we have so far are able to understand all of these figures here. So I started going like more in a philosophy line, then I went to sociology, and then my work has been interdisciplinary. So I use a lot of Hannah Arendt, obviously, and the ones that I told, Todorov, but from Mia Cashel, I think the Hitler myth is a very good concept for me to analyze, for example, the true believers case, and also working towards the Führer is also very good. I also use Zygmunt Bauman and I have been studying also like the theory behind the political passions to try to understand like this form of involvement in the regime. So Pierre Hansard is also someone that I use a lot. So, I mean, it's been like a miscellaneous of a lot of people. I don't know what's going to come out of there. And about the other points, like from law, I have begun to read some people who study Nuremberg from the legal aspect, but I don't think I'm going to incorporate that very much. But for instance, Kim Priemel is one that analyzes very deeply not only the Nuremberg trials, but the other subsequent 12 trials from the United States. So he's one of the sources that I use, but it's very different to analyze from a legal and a law standpoint, because Nuremberg is such a standpoint that people from different areas research. So I think it's going to be just a little from the law.
Thank you. And I'm actually I realized I was going to stop recording at the Q&A, so I didn't mind mine being recorded. I'm just telling everyone that I'm stopping